Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I am the chair of this committee. On my right, I'll start right at the right. I've got Sandra Brannigan, who is the senior planning lawyer, and Jodie Ingram, who is another planning lawyer who's joining us today. To my left is Becky Eads, who is, what's your official title? You're the head of planning and development. And to the left of Becky is Dan Metcalf, who is a principal planning officer. Down either side of the tables, you'll see the other members of the planning committee, who are all the democratically elected members of this committee. I'm just going to take a note just to go through one or two things before we start. And the first thing I would like to do is just note the change of committee membership that we have for the next municipal year. So I'd like to place on record my thanks to Councillor Stewart for his time on this committee and welcome Councillor Rowley to the committee as a substantive member. In terms of a bit of housekeeping that I just need to do, we're not expecting the fire alarms to go off, even though it might feel like the building is on fire. If the alarms do go off, then those of us who are sat around the table, we all know the ways out. We'll help everybody in the room out of the building. During the meeting, if I can just ask that everybody make sure that they've got their mobile phones switched off or on silent. And if you need the toilets, members of the committee, we're not allowed to leave the table during the hearing. We'll take some adjournments and things, but members sitting in the public gallery, you are welcome to come and go through the door behind you into the where the toilets are if you need. I'm just going to note that there are one or two people using laptops and one or two people without laptops. That is just because some members of the committee prefer to use paper copies of the reports and some people prefer to use the online versions. I'd like to remind everybody on the committee and anybody coming and speaking, the acoustics in this room are not fantastic and the microphones that we use aren't always perfect at picking up things as well. We do have people watching online and we do have a hearing loop in the room. So if I can ask everybody to speak loudly, imagine you're yelling to somebody at the other side of the room, that's the way to do it, and try and speak directly into the microphone, keep your hands away from your mouth, all of those sorts of things. I will try and interject if I think I can't hear you properly or I think that other people might not be able to hear you properly as well. In terms of how the meeting runs then, this is a business meeting of the council that's held in public as opposed to a public meeting. That means that we've got very specific points where we will allow public participation during the meeting. Outside of those times, I won't accept any interjection from members of the public who are here to observe the meeting. And so if I can just ask those of you present in the room not to try to speak to or draw the attention of anybody on the committee today. It's very likely that we will need some adjournments during today's meeting. When we call an adjournment, it's really important that nobody tries to speak to members of the committee during that adjournment, and likewise that committee members don't discuss anything to do with the applications during that adjournment. And what I'm going to do is, taking my lead from the World Cup, we might be taking some additional hydration breaks during today's meeting. So we may break slightly more frequently than we ordinarily would do. And members of the committee, if you have overhydrated and therefore need another type of break, please just indicate to me. I'm quite happy to take frequent breaks today, given the temperature in the room. In terms of the actual applications, when we go through them, we follow a set course to go through them, which is that I'll, in a short moment, invite the officers to talk us through the plans. There's then an opportunity for committee members to just ask questions of clarification on the plans themselves. We then ask the officers to provide us with any updates that may have been received between the publication of the public report and today's meeting. We then go to public participation, and we have a number of people registered to speak today. So when we get to that section, I'll just talk you through how that section will work. We then go to members' questions to officers, which is the opportunity for the committee member to ask any questions about the report, any additional information that's been received, anything that's been brought up during public participation. We then move into debates where we discuss the application and bounce around anything that we think about it, anything that might need to be bottomed out. And then we move to consider the officer recommendation. We always consider the officer recommendation first. We will sometimes need to think about if there are additional conditions that committee wants to add, but the principle is that the officer recommendation should contain all of the conditions, all of the information that we need to be able to make a determination. So only after we've tested or considered the officer recommendation, if we don't accept it and want to do something else, we then have that opportunity as a committee. So that's the way that the meeting will run. I will try and keep us all on track and try and make sure that everybody knows where we are at what point in the meeting as we go through. So I'll now take us on to the agenda formally for the meeting. The first item of the agenda is apologies for absence. I've got one or two apologies to note and record, so I'm going to go through and then please correct me if I've missed anybody or got anything wrong. So first of all, we have an apology from Councillor Whitcroft, who is being substituted by Councillor Maroney. We have an apology from Councillor Eyre, who is being substituted by Councillor Fenton, and we have an apology from Councillor Culwick. I believe that's everything correct. And looking around the room, you all look like you're supposed to be here, so that's great. Agenda item 2 then is declarations of interest. And can I just invite anybody who wishes to declare anything in relation to today's agenda? Not got hands going up. I am just going to make everybody aware, as I've done previously, that my mum is a member of the York Disability Rights Forum. I have briefly discussed the process of planning with my mum in relation to this application 2 years ago, which was just to say these are the ways in which you can make any comment, but I haven't discussed anything to do with the substance of the application. So therefore, I'm comfortable that I've not got any predetermination. I'm happy to continue in chair for this meeting. Councillor Burton.
Just to say that I am actually a member of the York Disability Rights Forum steering group, but again, I haven't had any interaction about this application with them. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Melly.
Thank you. Yeah, just for transparency, I did used to be a councillor for Holgate Ward that this application is in, and I did meet with residents and officers and discussed the discharge of this condition and what the bridge might look like, but I didn't discuss anything to do with this actual application. It was before that, and having thought back about what I have said and who I've spoken to, I've thought about it. I don't think there's anything which would predetermine me for this sitting on this application today.
Okay, thank you. And so I'll then move us on to agenda item 3, which is the public participation general remit. That's for the general remit of the committee. There's nobody registered to speak under agenda item 3, so I can move us then to agenda item 4, which is minutes of the previous meeting. We've got one set of minutes to agree, which is the minutes from the 13th of April on page 7. Is everybody happy that they're a correct record? Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say, I think there is a typo in the minutes, page 10 at the top of the page. I think it's supposed to say construction rather than contraction. Is that right? Which kind of changes the difference.
I think that you're absolutely right. A contraction management plan might be something that occurs under very different circumstances. That is a typo, so we'll just get that amended to construction management plan. Well spotted. Anybody else with anything else, or are we all happy that they're a correct record? Okay, I'll take the nods and the no further hands that with that minor amendment, we take those as correct. So I can move us then on to the plans list, and that begins at page 13. We just have one item to consider under the plans list today, which is the application for the construction of a new pedestrian and cycle bridge with associated infrastructure following demolition of existing bridge at the York Central site. So Becky, do you want to take us through the plans, please?
Thank you, Chair. So it's a full planning permission for a new bridge, as you can see. So your location plan is up there. If you can just, so the red line here and other land in blue owned by the applicant. But you can see Upper St Paul's Terrace here, Wilton, sorry, that was so Yorkshire, Wilton Rise and Cinder Lane here. You've then got the existing layout plan. You can just, it might be easy, you might be able to see it easier on your papers, but you can see here, the bridge along here. And the existing bridge plans and elevations. Again there. And this is the proposed layout. As you can see, that's where it lands up here, where the green is. Comes through, down and across here. So a much larger bridge. These are proposed plans and elevations, so you can see that's where it's Wilton Rise up here. That, just for context, it comes down along here, and again the other section there. And these are the elevations. You see the uprights here to the bridge, the walkways. Again, they're all in your packs if you want to see them in greater detail. And these are the landing zones, again, that you can see here for Upper St Paul's Terrace and Cinder Lane for the details. And again, the proposed plans of where the landing zones are there. Again. This is the proposed public rights of way in terms of the phasing. So you can see each of the steps there that will result in the public right of way during construction. And visuals. So these are visuals. These aren't elevation plans. When you make any decision, you make it on the elevation plans, but these are to assist members. And site photograph include, well, this is the aerial view, so you can see the size of the site there. And again, here. Sorry, 2 seconds. I'm going to. And this is travelling forwards, the bridge from the railway station and away from the bridge from Cinder Street. Again, more photos. And that's it. I will rest back on that plan. So you've got the proposed elevations and plans for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Becky. I think just before I go to invite questions, I think it's just worth drawing committee's attention to paragraph 5.12 on page 32, which just sets out why we're seeing a full application today rather than a reserved matters application, because there is an outline planning approval in place for a bridge at this location. But 5.12 just specifies that the landing point for this bridge is slightly outside of the original red line, and therefore it requires this full application. I'm sure officers will be able to give a more detailed answer or explanation if anybody requires it, but I just think it's worth noting at this point. So in terms of questions on the plans, Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me if I have missed it in the application, but the current bridge, the Cinder Lane Bridge, is that going to be retained, or is that, so that's being taken down? Thank you. It wasn't quite clear. I may well have missed it as I read through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rowley. And I'll just note that there is a phasing strategy so that the existing bridge isn't removed until the new bridge is open and accessible. Councillor Burton.
Sorry, I'm on where it comes into Upper St Paul's Terrace. Could you point out on the terrace on the photo where it's going to come out to, please? Is that possible?
Which photo are you looking at? Just so I
Site photographs, proposed route to new access via Upper St Paul's Terrace. There's an existing access, page 82 on my papers.
No, it's not on that photograph.
It's not on that
No.
photograph, okay.
No.
Okay, Councillor Melly.
Do any of the plans and elevations show the locations and heights of the street lighting?
No, that's fire condition.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions on the detail of the plan? Not seeing further hands, so I move us then to the update. Dan, if you'd like to just talk us through.
Thank you, Chair. Just two updates really. One is an additional representation, and that's from the York Cycle Campaign. They make 7 core points, and I'll just run through those briefly. First, they maintain the support for the principle of an accessible link, but formally object to the amended soft segregation layout. They argue that the correct standards aren't applied to the bridge. They highlight that the segregated cycle lane fails to account for a buffer to the parapets, reducing the effective width of the bridge. They mention that the pedestrian footway is similarly constrained, so the effective width of the footpath isn't the 1.25 metres specified. In their view, they assert that the reduced effective widths introduce conflict criticised the road safety audits assumptions in terms of the speed of cyclists, and they request that if the segregation is to be approved, that designs incorporates coloured surface textures on the bridge deck. So that's the further representation. In terms of adjustments to conditions, there's a typo in condition 13, and as it reads in the report, it says including networks drainage networks S2 and H2. So the implication being that those can be part of the proposed drainage scheme, whereas actual fact it should say excluding networks S2 and H2. They shall not be utilised for drainage of the bridge. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll now move into the public participation section of the meeting. I've got a number of people registered to speak. So in a moment, I'll invite you up in turn. Everybody has 3 minutes to address the committee, and I will give you a sort of 30-second warning if I think that you're running over that time. When you've addressed the committee, if you could just stay where you are just for a moment or two, and there may be questions from committee members on any points that you've raised. So I'll just invite the committee members if they have anything to ask you before I then invite you to take your seat back in the public gallery. So the first person that I have registered to speak today is Marjorie Donaldson. If you'd like to come to the table. So if you just, in the center of the microphone is a little button that looks a little bit like a Wi-Fi button, and you press it and it should go green.
Oh. Assertive enough.
Okay, so if you'd like to start in your own time, and then as I say, if I think that you're looking like you're going to run over your 3 minutes, I'll just give you a little 30-second warning, okay?
I'll try and be brief, but in brief, there are 3 major issues.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. If you can perhaps just move your microphone a bit closer. This room isn't great for acoustics anyway, and with all the fans running and everything else, just if you imagine you're shouting at me and I'm over on, right back against the wall, ignore everybody else, just shout at me, and then that'll be great.
Well, the 3 major concerns are safety, noise, and ownership. And I'm speaking on behalf of a number of people in the area who can't be here. So some of the issues have already been put forward in the complaints procedure, whatever it was. And I don't know if you want me to enumerate those or elaborate on them. Yes.
You're welcome to raise any points that you wish to draw our attention to.
So some people feel there's not been enough impact assessment of what the development will do, the noise, the footfall, the bike fall, and well, it's going to be particularly St Paul's Terrace, Upper St Paul's Terrace, and Wilton Rise, because it's noise and it's footfall. Too many people. Upper St Paul's Terrace area, the landing area, that is the bit that's the issue here, isn't it? Because it's owned by the council. Where does ownership come in, and how does that actually affect what might come? That's all these regulations and such like, isn't it? But seemingly back in the 1970s, the area was designated as a green space, and I think that's when the ownership became what it is now, but I couldn't find who actually owns it. It's the Crown that owns it, presumably. But I sort of got a bit sidetracked on that one, because there's the proposal to take down some of the trees. Well, it was designated a green area back in the 70s, and now they're saying take the trees down and it doesn't matter. Well, I think it doesn't matter. And that people are saying neither Upper St Paul's Terrace nor Wilton Rise are suitable because of the proposed potential exaggeration of use. And the top end of Upper St Paul's Terrace, the landing area, is a turning bay. And so that's going to be very difficult. It's difficult already, but it's going to be difficult if there's 1 million bikes a day. And then Wilton Rise, not everybody wants the change.
You've got about 30 seconds left.
Oh, no, really, well, I hope I've covered everything. Not everybody wants the change. The people at the top are affected by these issues which we're objecting to, the noise, the safety, and whatever it was, the ownership. They want it moved on to us, which, okay, but it means it needs to be dealt with, and we feel that the council should deal with those issues rather than just shifting the blame onto somebody else. And the noise and safety, in terms of the railway, apparently depends what the bridge is made of. If it's made of anything like the Millennium Bridge, it would just be something echoes all the time, and safety issues also bring in emergency.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask you to draw to a close there.
Yep.
Thank you. So thank you very much for,
Thank you very
if you
much.
just want to stay
Sure.
put just for 1 second, does anybody on the committee have any questions about anything that you've just heard there? No? Okay. Thank you very much for your time. So if you just leave it for the next person, that's fine. If you take your seat back in the public gallery, thank you. The next person on my list is Catherine Blaker, who is speaking on behalf of the York Cycle Campaign in objection. And if you'd like to take your seat, as you'll have heard, you have 3 minutes to address the committee, start in your own time, and I'll try and give you a heads up around about 30 seconds before the end.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. The Cycle Campaign have been compelled to speak today to reflect our late representation and the change in our stance to objection due to the dangers posed by the revised plans to all user groups. We strongly support replacing the current footbridge with a step-free, accessible crossing with segregated space. However, segregation must meet national standard dimensions to be safe and functional. This design fails to do so, misapplying an outdated trunk road framework instead of the mandatory national urban standards LTM 120 for cycling and DFT Inclusive Mobility 2021 for pedestrians. The proposed 4-metre deck introduces what the applicant calls soft segregation, creating the illusion of width, which if built will compromise safety for everybody. I have 3 key points. First, the pedestrian path is insufficient. The layout restricts pedestrians to a 1.5 metre strip, but because pedestrians naturally shy away from high bridge parapets, standard practice dictates a 250mm clearance buffer. This shrinks the true effective pedestrian width to just 1.25 metres. This directly breaches inclusive mobility guidelines, which mandate an absolute minimum of 1.8 metres for 2 prams or wheelchairs to safely and comfortably pass each other. Secondly, the cycle lane is substandard. The remaining 2.5 metre cycle lane loses 500 mils to the mandatory vertical wall buffer required by LTA 120, reducing it to an effective width of just 2 metres. This is only acceptable for low-use routes with under 300 cycles per hour. For a flagship gateway into York Central, where downhill gradients will naturally accelerate riders and expand their lateral steering needs, a 2-metre lane leaves zero margin for cargo bikes, adapted cycles, or safe overtaking. Crucially, the council's own highways department has explicitly noted that because of these substandard dimensions, this layout will simply act as a de facto shared route. Thirdly, and lastly, we advocate for segregated routes. York Disability Rights Forum are vehemently opposed to shared routes, and we entirely support them. The reality is that this flawed design for segregation will squeeze pedestrians and cyclists into the same space, increasing the risk of collision between users with different needs. This new bridge has the potential to transform connectivity to the northwest of the city. We cannot endorse substandard infrastructure that will negatively impact users' experience. At a minimum, we urge you to attach strict conditions, creating compliant segregation, expanding the deck width to accommodate standard parapet buffers, applying distinct tonal surfacing to prevent accidental encroachment, and recalculating safety visibility using realistic cycle speeds. Let's build this long-anticipated bridge upgrade right first time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from committee members? Councillor Burton.
Could you explain to me what you mean by compliant segregation? I think it was that you said that again? Because I'm not sure that I understood it.
Sure, it's basically about the amount of space given to users on either side of the line.
Yes, but what is a good use of this space then? So what would you suggest?
Sorry, could you say that again?
What would you
If you just move
suggest?
your microphone a little bit closer to you.
Yeah,
I
so
think that'd be helpful.
What would you suggest instead of?
We're suggesting, I'm sorry, I'm not the expert in this, I'm representing the campaign. So we've submitted a follow-up, as your colleague referred to earlier. And we are we're suggesting that we use tonal and colour contrasts, frequent visual symbols, and then use an accurate safety audit based on real world use, so that in reality, users with different needs can use the bridge separately, safely.
Right. I'm not sure I quite.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, and I appreciate that you're here representing, and perhaps gonna ask you a slightly technical questions then. So if I'm understanding correctly, the position of the Cycle campaign is that you're very supportive of the segregation.
Yeah.
The concern is that the way that the segregation is set up at the moment may create safety issues.
Yeah.
And that the way that you think that could be mitigated, this is the bit I think is perhaps just wanting to understand. Is it that you think that the deck width overall needs to be wider, or that the demarcation between the cycle and the pedestrian needs to be clearer?
Ideally, we'd expand the deck width, but we recognise that might be beyond where we're at in the planning process. So you putting in place mitigations to reduce user conflict and make it safer for everybody is what we're advocating.
And so, for example, that might look like, I think you mentioned a different colour surface finish or that sort of thing. But in terms of the principle of where the segregation fits, notwithstanding in an ideal world, a wider deck, you're supportive of that principle, but think that it just needs to be made clearer.
Yeah, more as many design adaptations as can be incorporated to ensure that the space is usable for for different user groups with different needs.
Thank you. That's helpful clarification. Any further questions from members? No. Thank you very much for your time. If you'd like to take a seat back in the public gallery. The next public participant on my list is joining us remotely. So I should have Flick Williams. You should be able to hear me, and hopefully if you say hello, we should be able to hear you.
Yes, good afternoon.
That's great. We can hear you very clearly. So as you'll be aware, you have 3 minutes to address the committee if you want to start in your own time, and I will give you a heads up if I think that you're likely to run over.
I wish I wasn't speaking in objection. I do, of course, welcome the replacement of an inaccessible bridge with an accessible one. However, I believe that the compromises that have been made are a bridge too far, pun intended, and that an opportunity is being missed to properly future-proof this infrastructure. I would invite members to look at the artist's impression showing the full length of the structure on page 13 of the presentation as I make my remarks. Firstly, it is too narrow, and all other problems stem from that. 4 meters is insufficient for a bridge of this length. It will be quite a unique piece of infrastructure, and so all comparisons with other bridges are irrelevant. However, it's interesting to note that the most recently opened pedestrian cycle bridge in the country, Lady Bay in Nottingham, was widened as a direct result of public response to the consultation. In April this year, the Dutch, who are serious about active travel, opened a new pedestrian cycle bridge that is 7 meters wide, allowing for proper segregation. Segregation is necessary for safety of all users, but 4 meters divided into 2.5 meters for cyclists and only 1.5 meters for pedestrians is simply inadequate. The very necessary addition of a handrail, owing to the lack of sufficient landings, will only be on the north side, meaning pedestrians who need it will cling to that side, whether ascending or descending, interrupting free-flowing movement. As you can read in my objection comment, the original plans make reference to a mishmash of different guidance deployed to justify design choices. For wheelchair users, the difference between gradients of 20 and 22% are imperceptible, and I maintain that the sheer length of the structure without sufficient landings to rest will make it impossibly difficult for manual or attendant-propelled wheelchair users to use it at all. Brakes on such mobility aids do not stop you rolling backwards. Landings have the additional advantage of slowing cyclist speed. At no point has a detailed study of projected usage been completed. Beyond the bridge will be built 2,500 homes, a significant proportion of which will be M42 and M43 cat housing. That means a high residential population of disabled and older people needing to use this bridge. The York Central development will not include a supermarket, so we can reasonably anticipate that this will be the route to the nearest grocery retail in Acomb. Restrictions on car use are only getting greater, so why wouldn't we want to build an active travel bridge designed for ease of use for those at the top of the transport hierarchy, disabled pedestrians and disabled cyclists? Cost, of course, but as we keep having to find money for infrastructure projects where costs spiral, perhaps commit the money in the first instance to ensure ease of use for absolutely everyone. That would give meaning to the municipal slogan, "One City for All." We're only building it once, so let's build it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was just about to give you a 30-second warning, and then I got the impression that you were coming to a close. So thank you for your address to the committee. If you just hang on a second, are there any questions from members? Okay, I'm not seeing. Oh, sorry, Councillor Burton. Yeah.
What exactly are landings?
So we'll be able to cover that with the officers.
Okay.
Well,
It's to do with the gradient of the slope and level sections versus gradient sections.
Yeah, okay.
I'm happy to answer it. I mean,
Thank you, Ms. Williams. It is a question that's a technical question for the officers.
now,
I do.
I am a retired access consultant, so
I appreciate that, Ms. Williams, but we're in a formal setting where certain questions need to be directed to the officers and certain questions to the public participants. And I do appreciate your background. I think what might be helpful for you to explain, however, is the distances between the landings. I know that you referenced that in your presentation, and I believe that that's a part of the concern that you have.
Indeed, I believe that there should be a landing every 10 meters, but as I said, you know, the design has like picked you know, very selectively from different pieces of guidance, and by making the gradient 1 in 22 instead of 1 in 20, that avoids the guidance that says you need a landing every 10 meters.
Okay, thank you. That's a helpful clarification. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing further indications from committee members. So thank you for your time to come and address us today, Ms. Williams. You will be able to continue to watch the proceedings via the webcast. The next person who is registered to speak is Diane Roworth. So if you'd like to come to the table. And it looks as though the microphone is still live. And as you'll be aware, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. So if you start in your own time, and I'll give you a heads up when if I think you're running over.
I speak on behalf of York Access Forum and York Disability Rights Forum to most strongly support segregation of pedestrians and cyclists on this bridge. Let me tell you what it's like for disabled people to navigate shared spaces. Blind people cannot see cyclists. Hearing impaired people cannot hear them. People with limited mobility and wheelchair users cannot maneuver quickly. These people cannot take avoiding action when cyclists approach from in front or behind. Who moves out of whose way, cyclists or pedestrian? Providing a dedicated space to be for disabled people is the sensible, equitable, and right thing to do. I applaud section 5.2, where differing viewpoints are acknowledged, where Network Rail has submitted a road safety audit to demonstrate the feasibility of the soft segregation, and where the officer says, given the complex balance of spatial interactions and the competing needs of different user groups, this soft segregation approach is considered to be a suitable and acceptable compromise. This approach fits with the York Central promise of no shared spaces, the council's desire for more segregated facilities, the needs of disabled people and the advice of York's access officer. I'd like to thank Network Rail for these revised plans. They listened to disabled people, telling them what they needed, drew up new plans incorporating segregation and tested those plans with safety audits. I also thank the officers who have considered all the evidence and are recommending approval. I have two suggestions to enhance the safety of pedestrians and cyclists. One is take up Network Rail's offer and use different colours to differentiate cycle and pedestrian sections, and install signage to encourage cyclists to respect the pedestrian space and keep their speeds to a minimum. I have one final request. We have two unsegregated bridges that cause cyclists and pedestrians to dread using them. Scarborough Bridge, which was too narrow to segregate, and Millennium Bridge, which was segregated but is no longer. Who decided that and why? No one seems to know. On both bridges, cyclists and pedestrians really dislike having to weave in and out each other, incurring the wrath of each other. A safety audit could conclude that no reported accidents means unsegregated facilities are fine, but we know they are not. I would hate this new bridge to be desegregated in future. So can the fourth safety audit set transparent parameters and involve the access officer? In conclusion, these plans and this report demonstrate that all those involved have taken seriously the needs of all pedestrians and set a standard for the safety and inclusion of disabled people. I truly hope you will approve them.
Thank you very much. If you just sit where you are for a minute, and I'll just invite any committee members if they have any questions. Are you indicating? No, sorry, your pencil went up and I thought it was. No worries. I can't see anybody with hands up, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you'd like to take your seat back in the public gallery. The next person on my list is Councillor Callum Taylor, who is the ward councillor. And I'm sure you are well aware of the protocols, but I will be doing everything to keep you absolutely in line. So if you'd just like to start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. The overall York Central development is massive, complicated, and so drawn out it's hard to track. Casual observers won't know that we are here today because the outline permission for the overall development, granted in March 2019, established the principle of roughly where this bridge should go and why. I absolutely hear the worries of residents living very close to the site, and I'll come back to those shortly. I also have to recognise the huge weight of how this bridge will deliver a huge active travel improvement for likely thousands of people who also live near the bridge, also in the rest of Holgate Ward, and the western side of York as a whole too, for likely the rest of this century. That it's step 3 will be a game changer for people who cannot use the current bridge, replacing it with something fit not only for the 21st century, but just fit for human beings. And it would need to happen soon anyway, regardless of this wider York Central development. It should significantly increase footfall from walkers, wheelers and cyclists, and rather than hide behind neutrality or silence, I must be honest with those I represent who are opposed to this proposal, in that I would much rather have many more people using this route to reach the city centre instead of braving the often perilous Holgate Road or choosing to drive and reinforce the traffic and road safety problems on Holgate Road. I welcome the paper's explanation of all the competing requirements, standards and restrictions involved, and the recognition that this is not the best of all worlds, because it cannot be. I also welcome the changes Network Rail have made in response to the first round of objections. They've tried to be responsive, but they should go further if this is approved. I therefore ask for your help on 3 points. Can we include a line in the construction management plan prohibiting equipment, plants or vehicles connected with this bridge being stored or parked within the community garden? Is there any way to request CCTV for the bridge, or at least some sort of assessment on this? We just need something tangible to address the ASB concerns that have been raised. The strongest concern from objectors in the area remains unresolved too, and this is how increased pedestrian and cycle traffic will be safely managed at the Upper St Paul's Bridge entrance, where many children walk to access the park and the garden, and Upper St Paul's Terrace as a whole and Wilton Rise, with pre-existing parking and vehicle movements, will conflict with the increased active travel. The report acknowledges the issue, Chair, but because the application only deals with the bridge, it remains unresolved. So my concern is that, not through negligence, but more convenience, Network Rail might end up seeing the bridge as their bit, and the council sees Upper St Paul's Terrace and Wilton Rise as their bit, rather than working in a way that reflects how these two areas are intrinsically linked. Can we condition Thank you, Chair. Can we condition Network Rail to produce a plan with the council to manage these tensions before construction begins? Done well there. Thank you for your attention. I hope you can approve the application, but please also do what you can, where you can, to strengthen it. I can repeat what I've asked for as well if it helps, but all the best with your deliberations this evening.
Thank you very much. I was nearly going to say you don't have to carry on if you your time, but you've done really well. Thank you. So again, I'll just invite any questions from members on anything. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the Upper St Paul's Terrace, concerns about conflicts between residents, children accessing the park, and the increased volume of cyclists and walkers and wheelers.
Yeah.
Do you have any particular interventions in mind in terms of what could be done within the realm of what highways, CYC highways could do, which obviously we know there's a range of things in terms of parking restrictions, other interventions. Do you have any thoughts as to what that might look like?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fenton. So we did have one quite lofty idea before this planning application landed with you, which was to have, as the bridge lands on Upper St Paul's, there would be a sort of right turning exit, which would bring cyclists, if you like, around the back of Chancery Rise down towards the Fox, which would reduce, I would imagine, the majority of pedestrians and cyclists coming into the Upper St Paul's area and turning left. I don't think that's doable, or at least that's what Network Rail have said, because it involves their land. So where does that leave us in terms of the remaining highway? This is where it gets tricky. I don't pretend there's an easy solution. There will be winners and losers. I think we have to be honest and own that. And this is a trade-off on many different things. But I also don't think officers have seriously looked at it, because it's a sort of issue that's coming down the line. I wonder, and I'm not saying this from an expert point of view, I wonder if some sort of one-way system for that whole St Paul's area might ease conflict frequency. And that's just a non-expert, loose suggestion. But at the very, very least, we would need significant road markings and signage to try and manage people's behaviour, slow people down, perhaps even restricting the width of the highway at certain points. I mean, in a way, I'm spitballing and I'm a bit desperate for better ideas, but I guess my issue is we're still waiting on those proposals to come through. But there's certain thoughts that I've got in my mind, which I'd like the experts that we employ to look at this to work on in more detail. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's worth just noting, because I think this speaks to that point, and you referenced about this being a standalone application and the context of the wider outline application, and what that means for the remainder of the route. So just so that everybody's aware, page 32 at the very bottom, paragraph 5.14, and then going over onto page 33, just talks about the fact that if this scheme were to be approved, it doesn't discharge the outline condition that relates to the whole York Central site in relation to this bridge, and specifically says members can be assured that approving the physical bridge structure does not sign off on the wider finalised highway routing for the holistic York Central connections to the Holgate area of the city. So I think some of what you're talking about there in terms of beyond the landing point along Upper St Paul's or Wilton Rise, still get covered by that outline condition.
I do understand that, Chair, and I guess I've taken the liberty of using this speech to stress the importance of getting that right as soon as possible to put people's minds at ease. But yeah,
no, I absolutely take the point. I just wanted to make sure that the assurance was there as well. Any further questions for Councillor Taylor? I just going to ask one just slightly related. Again, you referenced it, and I think the first public speaker referenced it, just around the concern around antisocial behaviour, and whether or not there were things that could be done around that. I know my ward very well, so I know the parts of my ward where there are regular occurrences of antisocial behaviour and where other perhaps less so. And I'm not sure whether or not this is an area of your ward where there is a regular concern, or whether it's more that there's a concern that by bringing more people into the area, it might generate more antisocial behaviour.
So being totally open, in the 8 years I've been a councillor, I've had 1 or 2 residents living at the very top of Wilton Rise who have sometimes grumbled about people who've been into town until the early hours coming home over Wilton Rise Bridge being a bit loud. I wouldn't say they are frequent, far from frequent actually, reports. In terms of the what's to come concern, I mean, as the report points out, there's no real evidence to back up those worries. And if I'm being honest, a little bit of me thinks it's assuming the worst. So I think benches have been proposed to try and improve accessibility for some people who might want to sit down and have a rest, but equally some people think benches will attract people causing trouble. So I think there's something around benches potentially being temporary, or that they could be moved if issues did emerge with regards to ASB further down the line. It's a tricky one, but I think anything we can do to put the community's mind at ease, because it will significantly increase footfall, I think would be helpful. Because at the minute, I think the paper basically just says if there are issues, they can be reported and the police will deal with it at the time, which just feels a little bit after the fact. And we'll have loads of people saying we told you so if it isn't dealt with. But I know it's tricky, Chair.
Thank you. That's helpful. So with nobody else indicating, if you'd like to take your seat back in the public gallery.
Thank you.
Thanks
Enjoy
for
your
time this
evening.
And our final public speaker then is David Sweeting, who is here from Alverson Young, speaking in support. Mr. Sweeting, I think you're going to be joined at the table by, and I'm just noting that there are no chairs. If you'd like to, if you don't mind bringing your chairs up, and then fabulous. Sorry, I should have spotted that earlier. We have Stephen Hine from Network Rail and Nick Zisler from MHB, who was the designer, both available to answer questions as well, just while they're getting settled. Mr. Sweeting, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a heads up if you're getting towards the end, and then if you just sit tight, and I'm sure there will be questions from committee members.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair, members. My name is David Sweeting, Planning Director at Avison Young, and I'm speaking on behalf of Network Rail in support of this application. This proposal seeks permission for a replacement pedestrian cycle bridge at Wilton Rise, providing a new accessible connection between Holgate and the York Central development. Although the bridge relates to wider elements of York Central development, it is only the bridge element in isolation which is being assessed as part of this application. As officers identify in their report, the principle of a replacement bridge is already well established through the adopted local plan and the York Central project through condition 42 on the outline planning permission. The existing bridge is narrow, stepped and inaccessible to wheelchair users, mobility scooter users, many older people, families with pushchairs and cyclists. By contrasting, the proposed bridge delivers a 4 metre wide step-free route with a gentle 1 in 22 gradient, dedicated pedestrian space, tactile paving, resting opportunities, improved lighting and enhanced safety features. It will provide a strategic active travel connection between Holgate, York Central, the station and the city centre. This is a highly constrained site. The bridge must clear an active electrified railway while maintaining an accessible gradient, avoid impacts on York Central development plots and Network Rail operational assets, respect residential amenity and the Holgate Community Garden, navigate existing utilities and land ownership constraints and maintain public access during construction. The bridge has been shaped to balance meeting mandatory railway operational safety standards relating to clearances and structural design, whilst also incorporating accessibility principles and priorities. Throughout the design process, the applicant has sought to maximise compliance with accessibility guidance as far as reasonably practicable. We have worked closely with council officers, accessibility groups and local stakeholders, and that engagement has directly influenced the scheme. As a result, the design now includes soft segregation, an enlarged stair landing area, and additional accessibility measures, which officers conclude represent a substantial improvement over both the existing bridge and the original submission. Importantly, there are no technical objections to the proposal. Officers are satisfied that detailed matters can be appropriately controlled through planning conditions, including a comprehensive road safety audit process. Officers have concluded that the public benefits are substantial and outweigh the identified design compromises. Importantly, this bridge is a critical piece of infrastructure underpinning York Central, helping to ensure the development is sustainable, accessible and well connected. It will help unlock the commercial and employment generating elements of the master plan, supporting over 6,500 jobs, more than 1 million square feet of commercial space and significant economic growth for York. This bridge is therefore not only an accessibility and active travel improvement, but an important catalyst for the wider regeneration and long-term prosperity of the city. For those reasons, we respectfully ask members to support the officer recommendation and grant planning permission. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, do you have questions? Councillor Moroney.
Thank you, Chair. Referring to page 32 of the pack, if I may, paragraph 5.11. Part of the prior condition were that the bridge should be a minimum of 4 metres wide. Could you tell us why you chose the minimum width, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, as it says, condition 42 states the minimum of 4 metres is proposed. We went through an optioneering exercise looking at whereabouts the bridge could be located. The existing bridge is significantly below 4 metres at the end of Wilton Rise. And for that reason and a number of alternate additional reasons, we identified that wouldn't work to meet that sort of 4 metres. There's a number of sort of bridges examples that have been highlighted today. One of them being Scarborough Bridge, that's arguably less than 4 metres. There's a number of pinch points. The parapet actually curves in, so it's less than 4 metres. So from evidence that we've looked at, that bridge does work. It's got a higher number of sort of pedestrians and cyclists than we anticipate to be using our bridge, given the location of in proximity to the train station. As sort of highlighted within the report, the site is a compromised site. There's lots of constraints to meet. We have to get a certain height over the rail line, but there's also a number of development plots that are either in for reserve matters at the moment in terms of the development partners' proposals, but also future developments with Plot B. There are also network rail assets in terms of the entrance to the rock we've got to comprise with. The 4 metres has been designed in line with those constraints. Any wider than that, the angle to be able to get in the gap that is left by the York Central development and also the constraints of the active railway corridor and network rail assets and land ownership issues and utilities, there isn't the space to provide a 5 metre or greater than 4 metre distance. And if you have to get the curve, it would be a longer bridge, and therefore where it lands within the York Central development would affect, again, where the rock is, one of the network rail assets that's there at the moment, and the public realm, and effectively it will affect York Central development significantly. So for those reasons, that's why 4 metres has been identified as the maximum width that the bridge can be.
If I may, could I just follow that up? Given the rather peculiar and idiosyncratic shape of the bridge, was that taken into consideration as well?
Yeah, so exactly where the electrified line is, there's a certain height that the bridge has to be, and then where it lands within the York Central development, I think there's probably about, is it a 7 metre drop?
Yeah. So you need to get clear. You need to get your electrical clearance for the bridge. That's a minimum requirement for going safely over the lines. And obviously there has been talk about landing areas and gradients. So we need to get down from the clearance over the electrical lines down to ground level. So if we start changing that, you're going to start changing your gradients. So we're trying to optimize getting over the railway at the required level and minimizing that to an absolute minimum to keep our ramps as short as possible. So it's been a compromise between the two and trying to tie in with site constraints and the constraints of the requirement of the railway.
think I'm just going to jump in just with a supplementary on that, because I think it's just helpful for everybody to understand. So just speaking to those compromises, and I understand entirely that you've got a minimum height that you have to get over, and you've got a place at the bottom that you have to get to. In that intervening gradient, there is a question mark about landings, and those are the level sections when there's then subsequent grade. With officers that the gradient that's quoted to us is the gradient only on those gradient sections, not including the horizontal sections. But in terms of the positioning of those landings, my understanding, certainly from one of the public speakers and from some of the representations, is that there is a concern that they're too far apart.
Okay.
So in terms of how you chose where to place those landings, because the placement of them wouldn't change the overall gradient or the ending point, start point or ending point, how has that decision been taken, and why are they that distance apart and not a closer distance?
So they're driven by access points off the structure. So we've taken a flat point where there's an access set of steps down. You don't want to sort of have a falling section and then a set of steps coming off. So we've tried to do anywhere there's a turn. Again, you're flattened out on a turn. That's the drive.
So the bends on the bridge are defined by the parameters of the development plots or the network rail assets, the existing virtual line or railway line, sorry, or the access to the rail operating centre. The location of the stairs has been defined to enable the phase construction of the bridge, to enable public access across from Holgate to York Central during the whole construction phase. So the existing bridge would be operational, be able to be used. The new bridge will be constructed with the steps down, and then that will be opened, and then the existing bridge will be demolished, and then the remainder of the bridge, so the remainder of the slope will be built. So effectively, it will be open to the public at all times, and that's why the landing point was proposed at that point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Melly, I had you next on my list, and then I've seen Councillor Fenton.
I mean, I did have some substantial questions, but can I just clarify? So were you saying that at least one of the landing spaces is at the top of a flight of stairs?
Yes, yeah. So that was increased during the application process. So it was increased to 4.5 meters in length, from 2.5 meters.
So if somebody needs to stop for a break while they're wheeling themselves up a slope,
That area will be 20 square meters in area.
Okay.
So there's the landing area, there's the top of the stairs, then there's I don't know whether you've got the plan that you can show Becky, but there's an area where there's going to be a seating area.
Just bear with me 1 second. It just takes a moment or two for the projector to but I think it's
sorry.
probably worthwhile just doing so. If you can carry on speaking to that point, but we'll just ask that we have that up.
So at the top of the stairs, then there's a landing area that's separate, connected, but separate to the main structure, the main slopes.
Okay.
That's going to have a seating area. The actual design of that is still to be agreed. There's a condition requiring that. And then there's a landing area as well for the main structure, which is 4.5 meters by 4 meters. In total, that area is 19.8 square meters.
Thank you. So my substantive question was about street lighting.
Yeah.
So I know that it's subject to condition, but presumably you have done quite a lot of detailed design work and had to work on the electricity supply and that sort of thing. So do you have an idea in your mind of where the street lighting might be, how frequent, how high, that sort of thing?
Yourself come in, but before, it's not going to be conventional street lighting in a sense. It's not going to be 4 meters or 10-meter poles. It's going to be within the parapet, similar to how, if you're aware of the proposals for the 2 other bridges on York Central, so Severus Footbridge and East Coast Mainline Bridge, they'll be within the parapet. So I don't know whether you want to expand on that.
It's basically it's downward lighting from what we're looking at, downward lighting from the parapet itself. So it's encased, it's enclosed within the structure. So you're not, if the trouble with having high poles is you get glare for the train side of things as well. So it's all contained within, and it also helps with ambient lighting as well. So if you're concerned about glare on residential properties nearby as well, if it's encased within the parapet, it reduces that ambient light as well.
Sorry, can you remind me what the height of the parapet is?
1.8 over the
8 of the
electrified
rail.
line, and then 1.5 for the remainder. It has to be 1.8 to meet the standards that Network Rail. So it's 1.8 over for that sort of flat first 70 meters, 60 meters.
Okay, Next on my list, is this a supplementary on the lighting, councillor Maroney, or no? In which case, I'll add you to my list and I'll go to councillor Fenton.
Thank you. One of the public speakers raised the issue of risks arising from a lack of clarity as to which side of the soft segregation cyclists and pedestrians and wheelchair users should use. There's a condition 7 talks about prior to the bridge being brought into public use, full details of the final deck surface treatments will be approved by the local planning authority. I just wanted to confirm whether you would have any in principle objections to whether it's colour contrast, whether it's regular repeater symbols, because across the city where there are segregated paths, you have the symbols at the beginning of the path, but then people joining the path partway through and no one has any idea which side of the path they're meant to be on. So is that something you've given consideration to, and is that something you would be willing to incorporate in the proposals that you do bring forward for that?
I think the simple answer is yes, we are willing to incorporate that. We can work with officers and whether that's the planning officers, highways officers, access officer, to ensure the most appropriate sort of bridge deck surface is proposed, whether that's, like you say, colour, tonal, signage, or all of the above. We're happy to work with officers through that.
Yeah, certainly could confirm that from our perspective, that we will work with our planning consultant and the council on what is the best solution for that bridge.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to let you know, we've had a look for what plans we've got access to in the meeting for this area of the footbridge with the steps, and we haven't got anything that we can blow up in a sort of a meaningful way to be able to show you on the screen, unfortunately. So I think we can indicate where it is, but we can't show you in any particular detail of what it looks like other than the description that's been given. So the next person on my list for a question was councillor Maroney.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your previous answers. I'd like to seek clarification on those. So if I may, I'll ask a two-part question.
Okay.
Firstly, what I think I heard was you were saying you couldn't really increase the width of the bridge because of constraints over land ownership issues.
One of them is land ownership, but it's also around the future development plots for York Central. So you've got two plots there, plot E, which is subject to a live planning application, reserve matters application. It's got a detailed design for one of the plots there, which that's where we've aligned the staircase for. So it cuts between plot E and plot B. Plot B isn't subject to a live detailed application. It's just subject to an outline parameter plan. So that shows the maximum. So we've got to make sure we keep outside of that area.
Okay, so forgive me, I don't quite know how that plays out, but could
there's
you...
effectively a small corridor that the bridge at any height can, well, obviously, but the height it can't go any further towards the rail line because it must be a certain offset unless it's a certain height. And then it can't go any further towards York Central because of the development plots there. And then where it lands within York Central, there's an access to the rail operating centre that's an active operation. So you have to retain that access for that. So there's various different elements that mean the site is constrained.
Thank you. So if I may, I'll ask the second part of the question. So can you reassure...
1 second, councillor Maroney, just because councillor Melly indicated a supplementary, which I think was in relation to that, and I don't know what your second question is going to be. So is it part of the same thing as well? Because no, councillor Maroney, if it's sort of keeping us in that same area, and councillor Melly can just hold. I'm just trying to work out before we move too far away from things, but I'll do that if that's all right. Because councillor Maroney first.
Okay, thank you. So just for clarification, can you reassure the committee that you've exhausted all avenues of trying to get bits of land you can nibble into, which would in theory allow a broader bridge?
So yeah, the initial stage, so this goes back to probably over a year ago, there's initial optioneering stage where we looked at all the options. So for transparency, there is an outline planning application or permission that proposes two routes. One being the existing route through Wilton Rise, an alternate one, Chancery Rise. We've looked at all those options And ultimately, this is the most appropriate option to meet the requirements of both the condition, but also the various standards and guidance that have to be met.
I guess I was addressing who owns which parcels of land in my question rather than other considerations, but I presume you covered that in the answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor Melly.
Yeah, it was a very similar question. I was just wondering if you could tell us who owns those parcels of land that you're saying the bridge can't encroach onto.
I think we just need to be a little bit careful here in terms of we're determining a planning application. It doesn't matter who owns the land. We're just determining an application. I think
Yeah.
I understand where you're going, and I'm not going to say you can't answer the question, but what I just want us to be clear as a committee is that from our perspective, we determine the application that's before us, irrespective of what the land ownership is. It's just, is this an acceptable application?
Yeah, but I think part of the planning balance of whether it's acceptable or not is 4 meters wide enough? And if not, is there reasonable reasons why it can't be wider? And we've been told that it can't be wider because there's a plot of land that there isn't currently a house there, but somebody would like to build a house and is.
I think the land
land-
ownership
land-
point is more around the fact that Wilton Rise isn't an option. Because the existing width, so when I reference the width is all the options that we've encapsulated. One of them being is the access off Wilton Rise is, I don't know, it's less than 4 meters, 2.7 meters. But Network Rail don't own either sides of there. They're owned by residents, I believe. So we don't own that, so we can only do it 2.7 at that point. So that's one of the land ownership reasons why that access can't be provided. So that's why it has to be that point. So when I mentioned all the different points, it's all the optioneering, and it's effectively me just trying to explain. We've gone through a very rigorous approach to look at all the different options for the alignment, but also the width of the bridge.
Certainly, we considered probably circa 20 options to start with before we narrowed them down. So we did consider access points right up and down that road and corridor. And this was the most suitable, and largely it was the most suitable because the land raises up, which lends itself to getting a bridge at grade over the top of the electric wires.
Thank you. I'm just going to take the opportunity just to remind everybody, as always with any planning application, we can only consider the application that's before us and whether or not it's acceptable, not what we might like there to be or how we might like it to be amended or different as a design. So I'm not suggesting that they're not valid questions in one sense, but we just need to be careful of our job is to determine this application and whether this application is acceptable, not if only it could be like this or if only it could be like that. If we don't think it's acceptable as it is, then we refuse it, and that's our job today. Councillor Burton, I had you next on my list.
So I've heard what you've got to say about 4 meters versus 5 meters. I think it is a shame that you couldn't have 5 meters, but you have explained in great detail why, given the current constraints, it can't be. I'm pleased that you have included segregation as a disabled pedestrian. I spoke with the access officer about something called iGlow.
Oh, yes.
Which is apparently a very new and good form of tactile paving, and I think it glows in the dark and all sorts of things. And I noticed, I think Councillor Fenton said about having symbols painted on all along, because I personally prefer segregation. I don't like the way that the Millennium Bridge has been left non-segregated. I don't feel as safe as I used to. So I think segregation is important, really. Somebody's going to say something really controversial, but I don't understand why cyclists can't get off and push their bikes, because when I was a girl, that's what you did. But anyway, apparently that's not the thing anymore. But it would make everything a lot easier, wouldn't it, for a very short space of time. We have to go slow as disabled people, but there you go. Anyway, that's you've heard of iGlow, you're considering it, and you'd work with access specialists
Yeah,
on
that's-
tactile?
Yeah, Dave Smith shared it with myself, and we shared it with the team, and as we go through the proposals for discharge in condition 7, I think it is.
Yeah.
Sorry, when we go through the process of discharge in condition 7, it will be one of the things that we're considering when we speak with officers.
Just so that everybody's clear, because I was, you obviously know your conditions well, because I was just having it pointed out.
Well, no, it was
Page-
just those
Page
that-
53,
before.
Condition 7, specifies about the precise layout and specification of tactile paving and the surface dressing and whatever. So that has to be discharged under that condition. And similarly, condition 15 on page 57, there's a built-in road safety audit and various phases of that as well. So I just wanted to draw committee members' attention to those two.
I just wanted to, because sometimes that gets forgotten in the detail, and then disabled people suffer from that. So
Yeah, no.
Okay,
It was just to give you that
Yeah,
assurance that there is the condition in there,
Okay,
but
great,
it
thank you.
was noted already. Okay, I haven't got anybody else on my list. Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. It's just sort of similar to do with accessibility, I suppose, but some of the concerns were raised about handrails and about how in certain sections it wasn't possible to put in handrails. I wonder whether you could just elaborate a little bit about that and provide some explanation, perhaps some reassurance why that isn't possible.
So one of the main restrictions over electrified lines is with the potential for climbing over. So the whole point is the internal face needs to have no footholds. So you couldn't put a handrail across a railway without having it enclosed effectively. So if you're over a railway and you have a handrail that's 1 meter above the ground, that basically gives someone opportunity to climb on and climb over. So it's that side of things.
So to answer that as well, to add to that, that's why the element of over the electrified line, we can't provide a handrail. However, the remainder of it, so effectively the sloped area, we are as part of the condition that sort of requires that.
Councillor Moroney.
Forgive me, a supplementary, the 1.5 height on the
Yeah.
handrail was deemed to be inappropriate, especially for wheelchair users.
Yeah, I don't know where that came. Yeah, we're working with accessibility and what's required in terms of guidance for what that height needs to be. So the height of the parapet is 1.5, and we understand that it has to be somewhere different to that. So we recognise that, and as part of the discharge of the appropriate condition, we'll work with the relevant officers to submit and ensure the detail is correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you.
Just one second. Apologies. I did have an indication from Councillor Baxter, which I'd noted and then completely forgot. Apologies. I will come to you in 1 second. Councillor Baxter.
I think we've got too many.
No, I'm good now. Okay, all right. Thank you, Chair. Yes, just following on from Councillor Clark's question, the distance of the handrail from the kind of side wall, the outside of the how wide is that sort of in distance? And then in reality for humans, because if there's a handrail, you kind of move a little bit further away. Kind of how much does that in reality, when someone's walking down or cycling down, take away from the overall 4 meters?
So our proposal for the parapet is different to Scarborough Bridge. Scarborough Bridge curves in on one side, whereas our parapet splays out. So it's 4 meters at ground or deck level, but at the height of the 1.5 meters, it's greater than 4 meters. 4.1 meters potentially. So that allows the route for the handrail. I don't know exactly what the offset needs to be. I don't know the answer to that question, but at that height of the handrail, it will be greater than 4 meters because of the splay element of the parapet.
So typically your handrail, you have a railing and then you're supposed to have 50 mil clearance behind it. So it's 50 mil to get around the back of that railing. So your railing is sort of within that depth.
So, sorry, I don't know if I'm not being able to visualize it in my head properly. So the railing won't encroach on the inside. It's on the outside.
It's inside the profile of the bridge, but because the profile of the bridge goes outwards.
Okay.
When you're looking at the 4 meter at ground level, you're not coming into that because your railing is in the splayed section higher up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and apologies, councillor Fisher.
Mine
Sorry,
also-
sorry. I'm so sorry, councillor Fisher. I'm going to interrupt you again. I think this is another supplementary.
For mine.
Yeah. Oh, is yours a supplementary as well? I do apologise. In which case, councillor Fisher's is also supplementary. I will then come to you, councillor Rowley.
Thank you. I welcome the inclusion of the handrail. I think that would be very, very useful for people with disabilities to actually negotiate the areas of gradients. Am I absolutely correct that the area where there is not a handrail, the section over the electrified tracks, is completely flat? So there is actually no practical need for that handrail at that point?
There will be a slight fall on there because you need to make sure you've got drainage on there. So you couldn't, if you had it completely flat, you'd have a ponding of water issue.
Right.
So there will be a fall across there. But
So what sort of gradient is it approximately, please?
I haven't got it on the top of my head, to be honest. I'd have to have a look.
What is it cambered more than?
Yeah, so you'd have camber to shed it towards the side.
So there's no actual gradient where you go up and down as you travel across?
I will need to double check on.
All right, okay. Thank you.
And just to be clear, even on flat and level, in an ideal world, you'd have a handrail because some people do need a handrail for flat and level, but the regulations about crossing over a electrified railway line preclude there being a handrail. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a clarification. On page 75, the drawing on page 75 says that the width at the top is 4.22.
Okay, thank you.
That's what it was.
Better than I said then.
Okay, I haven't got further people on my list for questions, and I think that we've had a good lot of questions, unless anybody has anything else that they need to ask at this point. I am notwithstanding everything that I said about land ownership, just if you can answer it very quickly because it was raised by a member of the public in the earlier speaking. Do you happen to know what the ownership is of the land where the thing lands on the St Paul's side? Is that in Network Rail's ownership or is that in the council? And it's just a quick, if you know, you know, and if you don't, we've got ways of finding out.
It's within CYC or Network Rail, depending whereabouts it lands, whereabouts you're talking about.
Okay, yeah. So we could perhaps invite
No
the
third
ward
party.
councillors just to clarify that point in terms of the very specifics. In which case, thank you very much for your time today. If you'd like to take your seats back in the public gallery. And my proposal will be that in the best sort of copying Infantino or whatever, we now take a hydration break and we just have a short 5-minute adjournment. I make it slightly before 10 to, so we come back at 5 to if we can, please. Okay, welcome back everybody to today's meeting of the Planning Committee. We are partway through determining the application for the construction of a new pedestrian and cycle bridge at Holgate as part of the York Central site. We are now in the section for members' questions to officers on the report, anything that's been raised in the public participation and the updates. So I invite indications for any questions. Don't all rush at once. I saw Councillor Maroney first and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Given my previous contributions, it probably won't be terribly surprising to officers. I direct you to page 57, recommendation 15, if I may, and I'm demonstrating my ignorance that this four-stage audit, trying to keep cyclists and pedestrians safe. How much reassurance can I take from that, given what we've already discussed? Thank you.
How much reassurance can you take? What I don't. I
Yeah,
don't
it feels
understand.
like it's slightly after the event where,
No, it says prior to construction of the bridge superstructure, so it's before it's constructed, we want those surveys, so before it's constructed, we're expecting a stage 1 and stage 2, and then it's basically, it's through each stage of the construction, we assess the safety in
Yeah.
terms of a road safety audit, so that's a belt and braces type condition. Sorry, that's not very technical, but that's what we're aiming for with that, is to ensure that we've got a road safety audit, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then it limits it, and then you look at stage 4. So it's a staged to ensure that we are as confident as we possibly can be through that condition, that it's a safe environment. Does that help?
I suppose I was asking for reassurance. I mean, I'm sure it does help and it should help, but kind of the bridge is there then, isn't it? So.
So I think from my perspective in terms of the questions that I've posed, and if you read through the condition, so there's a stage 1, stage 2 before any construction.
Yeah.
There's then a stage 3, which is before any public use of the thing. And then once it's in use, there's a stage 4, which is within 12 months. Now, I was asking questions as part of the chair's briefing around so, for example, we've discussed the soft segregation, we've discussed the need to remove conflict between cyclists and pedestrians, etc. And I was given the assurance that with this condition, if the planning authority felt that there was any conflict or any unforeseen safety issue, there would be sufficient strength within this condition to be able to seek variation of the plan to a limited degree in terms of the dressing of the surface, for example, the way that the segregation was working. So with all of these conditions, you have to think of them in terms of this is a mitigation to ensure that the bridge is acceptable. So the question I think that you're asking is, we want this bridge to be safe. Does this provide enough mitigation and enough within there? So I can't answer for you in terms of does it give you enough. I know that as the chair, I've asked privately questions about how robust this is or isn't as a condition, and as Becky's just said, it effectively it's considered to be a belts and braces condition with enough flexibility within it that if something unforeseen was occurring, there would be scope to be able to make the amendment in a reasonably nimble way to ensure safety on the bridge.
Thank you. No,
does that make
the
sense?
answers from both of you is helpful. Thank you.
Sorry.
It was helpful from both of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Councillor Clark.
So I did have a supplementary before a more substantive. We seem to be using substantive a lot today, so I'll use that as well as before a more substantive question. But on page 35, 521, it does talk about a road safety audit, and that the one has already been carried out, and that's what has led to the soft segregation, or at least sort of confirming that approach is suitable and acceptable. I just wondered if we're building in conditions about further road safety audits, how robust has this previous audit been, and what is the kind of relationship between that one and the ones in the conditions?
Through you, Chair, the initial road safety audit was simply to demonstrate the feasibility of the soft segregation alone, so it didn't look at any other aspect of the bridge's safety, whereas the post-decision road safety audit, if members agree that conditions should be applied, would be a more holistic exercise. It would look at the whole bridge and the arrangement. That's it in a nutshell, I think.
That is, thank you. And then my substantive question then, it was just coming back to, I suppose, Councillor Taylor raised, which is about the highway routing, and just thinking about that in advance, and to what extent, if this is a standalone full application, what can we change on that when we come to, I think, is a discharge of condition 42, and how you route the pedestrians and the cyclists in Upper St Paul's Terrace, so that there isn't that sort of conflict which was indicated as potentially quite hazardous for those users.
Condition 42 of the York Central Outline Consent is it's a very robust condition in that the overwhelming majority of the site can't be occupied until a scheme is put forward for a scheme, and it's for the management of pedestrians, cyclists and traffic on that route to Holgate Road. So it's the main, that will be dealt with. Members can be.
So that the reason why I'm asking that is because obviously this is a full application. It's to some extent it's separate. It's not reserved matters. Condition 42 is part of the reserved matters. So to what extent can we retrospectively then discharge condition 42 in an area that has had a separate full application like this? This one is basically what I'm asking if that explains it, if I'm being clear. Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. This doesn't, so granting consent for this bridge standalone proposal doesn't fetter the council's ability to enforce condition 42. So prior to occupation of anything on York Central beyond the approved government building would require a scheme to come forward for that corridor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? Well, you're welcome to, Councillor Melly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also struggling to fully understand the difference between this, as a standalone application rather than discharge of condition, because when it comes to discharge of condition and reserved matters applications and that sort of thing, we're very tied by what's been granted before, whereas this, we're not determining whether it is compliant with, what's been granted before. It's a new application. And quite a lot has changed since that first permission was granted. We've adopted a new local plan. The government's introduced LTN 120 guidance. So a lot of the report as written and what we've heard from the applicants is about how it complies with the condition and being at least 4 meters wide and that sort of thing. But there isn't really lots about, as a standalone application, does it comply with the new regulations? Given the quite a lot of changes there have been, nationally, there's been a big push towards better walking and cycling and active travel infrastructure. Has there really not been changes to minimum requirements for things like widths?
Picking up on those points. Absolutely right that this is a standalone application. It sits outside the York Central outline consent, so it's not reserved matters. It's not discharge of conditions. So I suppose it's a standalone application on a technicality that it's just outside of the application site area for the York Central scheme. Wash is just outside of it, and with that in mind, the parameters set down by the York Central application or permission are highly material, officers would advise. So whilst they're not absolutely binding, they are highly material, and the two factors that are, I suppose, probably the most important are the minimum width and the gradient requirements on the York Central scheme. And I think perhaps something else to hold in mind is that although this is a standalone application, I think in officer's view it represents betterment over what could be achieved within the envelope of the York Central consent. They're the options that the applicant's agent alluded to that were considered within the York Central site area entirely would, choose my words carefully, more compromised than the scheme that's put forward here. So that would be.
Just to interject as well, this has been assessed independently on its as a full planning application, and we've considered it, made a planning balance and made a recommendation for approval. So it has been assessed as a full planning application. We've just taken into account other material considerations and made you aware of that. It's not that it's not acceptable as a full planning permission, it is, but we've just indicated that there are other factors for you to consider as part of your decision.
Is that okay? You.
Yeah, I mean, you made the point, Chair, that we have to look at the application in front of us and whether it is acceptable or not. We can't look at, but it would be better if it was this, or it would be better if it was that. It's just, is it acceptable or not? And, you know, is it acceptable in terms of, does it comply with the condition, is different from, is it acceptable in terms of current planning policy and LTN 120 and that sort of thing, and they're not the same. And also in terms of, you know, what is a reasonable constraint and what isn't.
So I think that if I rephrase your question slightly, and I
Feel free, go ahead.
agree with what you've said there. So the outline condition has condition 42, which remains unaffected by whatever happens with this application. That's correct. So the discharge of that condition in terms of the wider sort of route between the York Central site and Holgate still has to be, that element of the condition still has to be discharged for the remainder of the York Central site to be developed because of the outline application. Is there anything in condition 42 that precludes this application meeting the highest standards of whatever other guidance may have come out subsequent to 2019 when that original condition on the outline application was first agreed? As in, meeting condition 42 shouldn't, in my understanding, mean that this application can't meet or can't be as good as what the current standards say it should be.
I think that's a fair point, Chair. If you isolate it, the standards from the practical site constraints, for example, in terms of the landings, if those were to be more frequent, just I suppose one of two things: either the bridge has got to be longer, and therefore that would, unless it's very circuitous, you cut right across the axis of the rail operating centre, or the intervening ramp sections would be steeper. So there's the practical physical constraints of the site that would render some of the standards that might apply being impossible or very difficult to meet.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying then is that it's the location of the site and the restrictions of the site that cause the compromises that are outlined in the report, rather than anything specifically in relation to the pre-existing condition 42. And so the assurance that committee members need to take from the condition 42 is about what happens on each side of the bridge in terms of the remainder of that route, rather than the bridge itself. The compromises within the bridge in relation to the statutory guidance. Your contention is that that's, and as has been said by the applicant, that's limited by the interplay between the different guidance in terms of the electrified railway line versus the LTN 120 versus other things, and then the site constraints in terms of the site that's available for the bridge. So,
yeah, I mean, I'll just, I mean, I'm explaining why I'm struggling. There's a lot of constraints here, and in quite a few different dimensions to try and look at it from, and lots of different things to consider. We've been told that by just sheer extraordinary coincidence, the absolute minimum width it can be is exactly 4 meters, and also the absolute maximum width it can be is exactly 4 meters. Because I can't completely understand, you know, the entire design and all the parameters. It's too many, you know, it's too many factors to think about. It's taken a very, very long time to come up with this. I don't feel like I've had enough reassurances to explain why it really can't be more than 4 meters. We've heard that Councillor Rowley found the figure that it can be 4.2 meters, 1.5 meters higher. It can be 4.2 meters at the top, but it can't be any wider than 4 meters at the bottom. We've heard that it can't be any wider because they want to build some houses, but we haven't heard anything to say that they have to build those houses there. It's just that they want to. Like, there's too many missing reassurances for me about why it really can't be any wider. Because because, you know, you said very rightly that we can only look at the application in front of us. 4 meters width clearly isn't wide enough.
So,
but what is a reasonable constraint? Yeah, but what is a reasonable constraint to say that it really can't be wider? And yeah, what isn't? If in any other application, if a developer came along and said, "Oh, we're not providing enough affordable housing," but we're not, you know, we would say, "Is that reasonable or not?" Or if they said, "We don't want to provide enough green space," we'd want to see the evidence and say, "Is it reasonable or not?" I'm not seeing enough to say that it not being wide enough, whether that's reasonable or not. So I'm just asking for, like, I guess my question is more detail on why it really can't be any wider.
I don't think we can, that's not, in terms of this application, and we've said this to you at the beginning, you've got to consider what you've got in front of you, and this is what we've done, and we've made that assessment to whether or not it's acceptable based on a full planning application, and that's what we've done. And we've considered that that's acceptable. So then to start negotiating over and above wouldn't be reasonable, because we've assessed what we've got in front of us. We've not had any objections from any statutory consultees. Yes, I understand that there have been objections from interested bodies, and they should have weight. But in terms of this application that you're considering, it wouldn't be reasonable to start saying we want it wider if it's acceptable as it is. And that's how we've made the assessment, based on the balance, based what's in front of you. And that is what you will now be asked to make the decision on. It's not, well, could it be or could it be? It's this, and we've made an assessment in planning terms. It's all in the report, and that's where you're going to need to balance, because we've done that balance, and we've come out that it's acceptable, subject to a whole raft of conditions that we think are sufficient in terms of mitigation measures. So I don't think that you potentially can ask why we haven't asked for more, because we've done assessment on what we've got and we've considered it's acceptable.
okay. Any further questions with regards to the report? Councillor Melly.
I have a question about the lighting, because it sounds like, you know, we haven't actually formally in the application got the details of the lighting. It's subject to condition, but we've heard from the applicant that they don't feel it can be higher than the level of the top of the parapet, which at its lowest is 1.5 meters and at its highest is 1.8 meters. So when all the assessments were done of the highway safety and the designing out crime and antisocial behaviour, was that done with the knowledge that the lighting would be below head height, and after dark, people's faces would be obscured? When there are conflicts between different cyclists, pedestrians, they wouldn't be able to necessarily see each other to make eye contact and, you know, clock that they've seen each other. If somebody may be feeling vulnerable, it's going to be basically a long alleyway, high parapets either side. If people are walking along feeling vulnerable, has it been taken into account when looking at designing out crime that you might not be able to see who's walking towards you or who's walking behind you because their faces won't be lit, only their feet will be lit.
The lighting proposal is clear in the application, so I think it's fair to say that the consultees have formed their judgment on the understanding that the lighting is to be lights concealed just slightly below the tops of the parapets. And there's a condition, we're recommending a condition for lighting details and the relevant, so the police design and crime officer, the highways officer, and others will be involved in that process. So if they have concerns at that point, the design can be, we can require that design be adjusted such that it deals with those concerns.
Okay. Councillor Clark and then Councillor Maroney.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just I just wanted to just ask about loss of trees. So there are trees being lost, and the sort of habitats are obviously being decimated virtually by this particular application. And there's talk that some mitigations can't be put, or some new trees can't be planted in the Holgate Community Garden, and I understand that was because it falls outside of the planning application, the outline. I just wondered whether you could talk a bit more about that and what reassurance there has been to try and ensure that that some planting could be done in the sort of community garden.
As I understand it, the trees in question are railway trees, so in the confines of the railways, and it would be in the applicant's gift to clear those in any case if they had to, but for operational purposes. But it's conflating two issues in the report, I suppose. But there is a requirement for 10% biodiversity net gain as part of their application. If members grant consent, there's a condition applied, a statutory condition requiring that the applicant submit a plan to us prior to commencement, and that shall identify how they plan to provide this 10% BNG. Now, what the applicant's contention is that will have to be off-site because there's nowhere within the application site area to enhance or plant trees and similar, because it's operational railway land. So that will have to be elsewhere. And there is provision in the legislation to facilitate that. That's in accordance with the rules for biodiversity net gain, if you like.
Could I please sort of just clarify that point then, that the 10%, I think there's actually additional units being put in to try and compensate for some of the loss of habitats at Holgate Community Garden. In terms of that net gain and what is done to obtain or attain that net gain, that is done somewhere else within the scope of the outline of this application, or somewhere else. And if it is done elsewhere, not within the site plan, then why can't it be done at Holgate Community Garden? That's my question.
It can be done elsewhere, but it's a formal system of purchasing credits from a facility that's set up. So that's the route the applicant will be essentially pushed down by the legislation.
My understanding would be, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, so we can't, as a committee or as a planning authority, say you must put stuff there because we don't have land ownership or the right to say that. But I don't think there's anything within the condition would preclude Network Rail having a conversation with local community gardens or other areas, and that be part of their submission that would be signed off by the planning authority. So we couldn't ask for it per se, but we would have to agree how they're going to demonstrate their biodiversity net gain. And when we're assessing that, there's nothing within this that would say it couldn't be, subject to them making their own arrangements with whoever. Would that be a correct understanding, or not quite? I'm happy to be told not quite.
Not quite. It's all put. The being biodiversity net gain system's quite complicated, and it requires the providers of these credits to be registered.
Right.
Okay. All sorts of things. So it's
okay. So potentially wouldn't be possible to do that as part of that 10% uplift, but similarly, I guess Network Rail might decide that they want to foster good community relations and plant some trees. Okay, was that you done in terms of your questions? In which case, Councillor Moroney.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a quick question, but I guess we'll see. How are we doing with the handrail height negotiations?
There is a condition about the handrail height. Trying to find you which one it is, 2 seconds. Where is it? 5. Is that 5? Yeah, that's right, isn't it? 5. Yeah, handrails are fixed to both sides of the connecting stairs. So yeah, we're still in the process of negotiating. It'll be covered by the conditions. So I can't say that we've got a fixed agreement yet. We've still got to work through it as part of the conditions.
Thank you.
Okay. Nobody else is indicating with further questions, so I'm happy that we move then into debate. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. This application, I think, is framed by 3 issues. The first, something which you've referred to already, is that naturally there is a presumption of development. There has to be good reason to refuse an application. And the mere fact that the committee might prefer something slightly different is not a safe path down which to go. The second point is condition 42 in respect of the substantive outline consent on the site. The important points there are that it establishes the principle of a bridge, and therefore it constrains the discretion of this committee in the determination of this current standalone application. And the third point is that this is a very good example of where it is necessary to compromise on policies / guidelines, to take a famous phrase and slightly alter it. Planning is the art of the possible. And that is what we're faced with here. This is an application which ticks a huge number of boxes and brings a lot of benefit in respect of the overall development of the York Central site, and in fact, pedestrian and cycle movements across the city in that area, as Councillor Taylor has identified. And putting all those things into the equation, I conclude that this is an application which should be supported. In terms of the conditions, Becky has made reference during the questions and answer sessions to a number of conditions. One thing which I think is clear from the speakers and those who express concern is the need for very clear demarcation between the cycle track and the pedestrian route. It's something I see on a regular basis because I use the Brownie Dyke soft segregation path on a very regular basis. And I think in particular, when we're looking at that tight corner on the radii, it's very important that there is clear demarcation in both directions so as to ensure pedestrians are on the one side and cyclists on the other as they negotiate that corner. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's, I was convinced by the applicant's explanation as to why the constraints around this site have led to a situation where the bridge width can't be extended, and you know, good reasons were put forward why it would be desirable for the bridge to be widened to accommodate segregation I think the principle of segregation as preferable to shared space, there seems to be sort of broad agreement. Would it be preferable for the bridge to be wider to accommodate a wider segregation? Yes, it would. Does the 4 metre width make the proposal unacceptable? I believe it doesn't make it unacceptable. I think comparing what's being proposed with what currently exists, having used this as a cyclist, and if you've got heavy pannier bags on, dragging your bike up the ramp is not it's not easy or enjoyable. I think there are, I think the application throws up interesting sort of behavioural issues that I certainly wouldn't put on this applicant to resolve. I think as a cyclist, you're tootling along and you ring your bell, but the pedestrian in the cycle lane has earphones in and has no idea there. And these paths are used in a less than optimal way by all users. That's a broader behavioural thing for us all to think about, and maybe there are design aspects that can reduce the risk of those kind of conflicts. But certainly that's not the job of this applicant to resolve. That's for all of us to think about. But I'm very supportive of this, which I think will be a real improvement for everybody on the west of the city getting to and from this site.
Thank you. And Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I think the first thing to say is that this complies with the terms of the outline planning application. It fulfills the minimum 4 metre width and the maximum gradient of 5%, sorry. So it's compliant with that. So to throw it out would be basically saying we're disagreeing with the outline planning consent. I don't think the planning inspector would regard that as reasonable. Segregation is an issue. Wherever you have any sort of area where pedestrians and cyclists are there, you will always get some people who don't pay any attention to the rules whatsoever. Both pedestrians and cyclists, some of them seem to think they have a do what I like card and they'll just go where they want. We have this in Strensall where we have a path that clearly says no cyclists, no e-scooters, no horses, mobility scooters, wheelchairs, pedestrians only. And I get cyclists going down there regularly and abusing me when I tell them to get off because they've got a do what I want card. It requires us an area of common sense. I'm sure York Cycle Campaign are all very, very respectful of this area. But at the end of the day, you can, however you'd go about segregation, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. There'll be some people who abuse it, and that is the problem. However, I don't see anything in this that will actually exacerbate that to an unacceptable level. If there clearly is a segregated line, it says cyclists this side, pedestrians the other, that should be it. But finally, look at what we've got already. That bridge, I've only been over it once. It's like getting into a prison. You can't go over it on a push bike or a mobility scooter or anything like that. It's like Fort Knox. This is going to make a massive improvement and a much safer route. So, because at the moment, I'm sure a lot of cyclists and mobility people on mobility scooters go down Holgate Road, which is a nightmare in itself. It's a massive improvement. It will vastly improve safety in every respect, and therefore I'm going to support it.
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
I won't go over everything that everybody else has said, but I do agree with Councillor Watson, Councillor Fenton, Councillor Fisher about this. It would have been better to have 5 metres. It can't have 5 metres. I think the inclusion of segregation is really important, and everyone has agreed with that. I'm slightly concerned about the residents in St Paul's Terrace, I think it is. So I think the inclusion of CCTV, I don't know whether we can write that in as a condition, but I know no, we can't. What a shame. But I think that would make it safer. And I do know that there is more CCTV coming into the city, and so maybe this would be an area, but we can't say that. But it does make sense to have in this sort of vicinity and this type of crossing. And I also agree with Councillor Melly about the lighting and how important that is for everybody crossing the bridge at night, especially because you know, when I could cross bridges, I probably wouldn't have crossed a bridge like this. I certainly wouldn't have gone on the old Wilton Rise one. Just not safe. Or probably is safe, but you just don't know. And to mitigate that, CCTV and good lighting would be great. So apart from that, I think, yeah, I think from what I've heard today, the reassurances about the type of tactile paving, different colours, they have listened to disability organisations, and I would be in favour of this application too.
Thank you. Any more for any more? I've not got any other indications. No, I think probably everybody seems to be reasonably in agreement with things that have been said. I will just very briefly just chuck in my thoughts, which are broadly aligned with everybody that's spoken so far. I think what I would also say is York Central has always been an opportunity for exemplar development. And I think that we probably all acknowledge that this is doing lots and lots of positive things, but isn't absolutely exemplar, but it's got lots and lots of things to be really positive about. So I think getting that balance between really positively welcoming this, what will be a huge change for the city, but continuing to push for the best that we can possibly get for the city out of the York Central development, and indeed any other developments around the city. And in particular, when we're talking about access and accessibility, that has to be the most important thing, not just for right now, but also for the future, in terms of what's been sort of suggested about, you know, an application that was approved originally, or an outline originally approved 6-7 years ago, and how things move forward, and just ensuring that we're not just doing the minimum that we can do, we're doing the most that we can do with every application. And I think taking that forward, I'm happy that the conditions allow for conversations to now continue around just exactly how the soft segregation looks in terms of the points that have been raised by public speakers and others, in terms of making sure that it is absolutely as clear and as safe as it possibly can be. And I would hope that that conversation will continue, not just once the bridge stops, but also thinking about the condition of the wider part of the condition 42, how that route through into Holgate and right the way through York Central is made to be as accessible and as safe as it can be. But I'm comfortable that the conditions, both within this application and the outline, do allow for that. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just on the conditions. There was a couple of things which you alluded to there. And one was the colour contrasting, whether that is something that can be built into a condition. And secondly, there was the use of the community garden in the construction management plan, and whether that could be conditioned to be excluded. Both things were raised by public speakers. Just a view on whether that was possible would be helpful.
That would be condition 7, I think, in terms of the segregation or the materials that were to be used. And I think we'd have to take a view from officers as to what's reasonable to specify versus does this give us enough. But also, you mentioned about the community garden. Can you just tell me which condition that relates to?
It was mentioned by Councillor Taylor. It just said in the CMP, so the construction management plan, about how you could exclude the use of the community garden for the setting of plants or whatever else you might want to use it for in the process of the construction.
Condition 10 is the construction, or requires a construction environmental management plan, although it doesn't specifically preclude the community gardens. It does, at point D, give the council control over where compounds and all facilities associated with the construction are. So that would give us the power to push back on that.
Sorry, is that condition 12, we think?
Sorry, beg your pardon.
Yeah.
I referred to the wrong one.
So page 54, condition 12,
Sorry,
no development. Yeah, that's the construction.
Condition, sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Condition 7 refers to the treatment of the deck. And again, all that doesn't explicitly require the different colours. It's within the envelope of that condition. It'd be open to the applicant to specify it. in line with.
No, condition 7.
Sorry, so, yeah, condition 7, we think is sufficient in terms of the surfacing. But it also directly relates to condition 15 about the stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. So they have to work together because it might not, it might or may not, depending on what this safety audits say in terms of the requirements for coloured. So I'd advise caution and potentially go with what we've recommended in terms of the final deck surface treatment. It's already covered there, and we need to take into account 15 as well once doing that. What was the other question?
So let's just stay on that for 1
Okay.
second, and we'll come back to the construction management plan, because Councillor Melly has that question on this as well.
I mean, tangentially, it's not about the construction environment management plan, but it was about condition 15, since you brought that up about the road safety audit. And why for the stage 4 road safety audits, that's the final one by the looks of it. Why that is conditioned to be within 12 months of the first public use. Considering that the build out time for York Central is probably likely to be more than 12 months from when this bridge is brought into use, so it won't be fully in use yet. There won't be traffic at its peak. So sorry, it is a bit off subject from Councillor Clark's original question.
Through you, Chair, as I understand it, that's the 12-month time period for the 4th stage is within, is the standard for the standard that applies to the production of road safety audits. That's a standard approach, and the idea is to capture issues arising in that immediate period after its construction, so that they can be adjusted as necessary, whether that be a sign that people don't seem to be noticing that needs to be moved, deck surface change in terms of the colouring or whatever. I think that the purpose is to capture it in the immediate before it becomes baked in and embedded.
But does that mean, if it's standard, does that mean it has to be done to that standard? Or does that mean, well, that's the standard wording, it's been copied and pasted, but it could be changed?
Sorry, just say that one. I don't know what you mean by that.
Just that if 12 months of the first, the development first being brought back into use, that being the standard time frame, is that a rigid time frame, or can it be changed if there's another time frame that seems more appropriate?
As Dan just said, that's standard for road safety audits. That's the standard practice, that you look 12 months once it's been brought into use.
Yeah, but what I don't understand is, because it's standard practice, does that mean it has to be done that way to a certain standard, or does it mean that's just the way we always do it as standard?
That's evidence based, that's how they don't just pluck it out of thin air. They know, in terms of safety audits, they will look and say that after 12 months it's bedded in and it works, and that's what the recommendation is, unless you know that you think that there's something different.
Yeah, but that's usually for a
I'm going to
change
interject,
in isolation.
Councillor Melly.
Yeah.
I think that the assumption that you can make is that the bridge has been designed to carry the number of users that will be anticipated by the whole site having been built out. Because I totally get the point that you're making, is that if you're making an assessment on is this app operating safely when actually the whole of the York Central site hasn't been built out, how can you make that assessment? I think we as a committee, we can't know that. I think what we have to do is work on the assumption that the design of the bridge has been designed with the end number of users in mind, and the point of this survey is to say, is it operating in the way that we anticipated it to operate? And if it isn't, we've got a mechanism to make some changes. Now, I grant you that is it operating in the way we anticipate it to operate with, however many hundreds of users per day they anticipate by the end point? We can't know that, but I think you probably can say, well, with the 100 users per day or whatever it might be, it is operating as we expect it to, or actually, even with only this few people, they're missing this sign and we've had a couple of collisions, and this gives you the hook to change that. I think my sense would be that we wouldn't have evidence to decide whether we did 24 months or 36 months or 120 months, because we don't know how long it'll take for the other parts of the site to build out. We just have to say, does this give us enough to get the bridge working in the way we anticipate it to be working, with the assumption of that number of people using it in 10 years' time or 15 years' time? So I'm going to take us then back to the construction management plan, because that was the other part that we were just in the question and we were just asking. And I think that the, again, in a similar way, that the response was at the top of page 55, under condition 12, is the site compounds and storage, that a layout plan showing the exact location of where everything will be has to be agreed before any development takes place. So my understanding would be that it would be at that point that a decision would be made or not about whether or not the community garden was in any way used as part of that. And I'll have to take officers' advice in terms of whether it would be reasonable for us to insert anything in there about specifically excluding the community garden, which I think is probably what your question was.
I mean, it would always be within the gift of the owners of the land or tenants to say, no, they can't use our land, or it's not strictly a planning consideration, but yes, you can, and here's the price. So that's sort of, so I think D, in my mind, point D would cover it, gives us the control from a planning side. So in terms of public amenity, we'd be considering it.
So committee will have to decide whether they think it's reasonable to insert that specific thing. I think my understanding would be, from what's just been said, that land is probably in council's ownership. So it's kind of our gift in terms of whether or not we allow Network Rail to use it. And if there's a clear steer from the local community and the local councillors and the committee and otherwise, I'm not sure that it would be reasonable in planning terms to insert a specific thing over which we don't have the control. But I think that there would be an understanding that when that site compound agreement was being made, but it's whether or not committee members feel that that's enough. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think these sort of suggestions are always problematic, I think, for everybody. But most significantly, there hasn't been a full appraisal as to the appropriateness or to use or not to use. My suggested way forward is for officers to note on the file the discussion and the wish, but it should not form part of a condition.
Chair, if I might assist at all, I mean, my suggestion would be that it might not be prudent to be overly prescriptive at this stage as to where site compounds might be, because the reason for the condition is to ensure that to protect, it does say to protect the local environment and ensure the safe and efficient operation of the local highway, and the operation of the local highway and the local environment, protect properties. It seems to me that it's maybe difficult at this stage to know exactly what the requirements will be, and to be overly prescriptive might not be prudent.
Thank you.
It's condition, and and it is addressed in part D of that condition.
Thank you. That is helpful. The only thing I would say is that the problem with that approach would be that would then very specifically leave open the possibility that it might possibly be used, even if it's very likely that we don't want it to be, or it's. And I suppose the question is actually, by being specifically prescriptive about that community garden that wouldn't be acceptable for the development of this site. But then the question I would pose to committee members would be, actually, are we saying that we would be not allowing a bridge to go ahead if the only reasonable place for a compound to be was on that, knowing that everybody wished it not to be the case? And that's the balance. So if members want to make a proposal, we can test it, but I think that they're the two parts that we're balancing in this.
Chair, I would suggest that it might not be a robust refusal reason, because you can't guarantee that a temporary compound might be in the gardens, and it might be necessary for whatever reason to have it there to enable the development to go ahead in terms of the construction phase.
I'm not suggesting we would refuse on that basis. I'm suggesting that we might write a condition that couldn't be discharged, and therefore the development couldn't happen because you couldn't discharge the condition.
Can I just interject? I
Yes,
think what I'm trying to say here is that we need to realise that there's a reasonableness of a condition, and that's what Sandra's trying to, well, that's what Sandra is advising, that we need to be reasonable. In this case, is it reasonable to be specific when we think that D already covers it, and that we think that's sufficient to cover a note if needs be is something we can do. So that seems a more reasonable way around of where we're at.
Personally, I'm happy with that as outlined, unless anybody wishes to make an alternative suggestion.
No.
Okay, no. Councillor Rowley.
So I moving on, Chair, if that. So I'm going to finish where I started, really, with the demolition of the existing bridge. And I have tried to read through. Forgive me, I may well have missed something. And the reason I'm bringing it up at the condition stage is because obviously the demolition of the bridge isn't a reason whether we would or we wouldn't approve or not this particular application. But I'm just thinking in terms of conditions, are there any conditions that we might want to look at, or are there any conditions in there that would be in regards to the disposal of the old bridge and the materials of the old bridge? Just curious.
There's a condition that relates to making good on the Wilton Rise side, but beyond that, no. The construction environmental management plan will cover the whole activity, including the demolition. But beyond making good, construction management, no.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose what I'm doing is I'm trying to seek some assurances that the bridge will be disposed of in a way that is environmentally friendly. I don't know. I think you know what I'm trying to ask, but I don't know if we can put that as a condition.
That would be covered. Sorry, that would be covered under separate legislation, so we wouldn't necessarily need to do that. The CEMP would cover it sufficiently from a planning side.
I'm just going to very quickly jump in, actually, because you didn't ask the question I thought you were going to ask, and I thought, I should have asked that earlier in questions. I will get us, I think, somewhere towards a proposal and voting in a moment, but I think it's probably worth just being clear on this, because the applicants were clear about the phasing in terms of the bridge. The new bridge, if approved, would be built and would be available with stepped access before the old bridge would be removed, and then once the old bridge had been removed, subsequent to that, the remainder of the step-free access would be a subsequent phase. And I'm just looking and scanning through whether there's anything that conditions the phasing strategy of that, because what we don't want to do is end up with a situation where it's 5 years before the step-free part of it is done, and hopefully it's there already.
There is a condition, Chair. Condition 3.
Yeah, perfect. So section B, programme specifying time windows for completion of the 3 construction phases of the bridge structure. So we'll just note that needs to be in a timely manner, but I'm sure it would be. Okay, I think we've debated and then gone back to questions, and then I'm not feeling that we need to debate further particularly. Nobody has suggested any additional conditions or amendments to conditions beyond the things that we'd like to note and make sure we're clear around. So I'm therefore happy for anybody to make any proposals at this stage. And I saw Councillor Fisher first.
I move the officer recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you. And
with the conditions of
I'm seeing 2 or 3 seconders, Councillor Watson, Councillor Baxter. Take your pick. We'll take that as let's go cross party, and we'll take a seconder from Councillor Baxter and a proposal from Councillor Fisher. And Becky, would you like to summarise?
So the application is recommended for approval based on the conditions in the report and the amended condition that is in your additional information this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, fabulous. So if I can see by show of hands, all those in favour of that proposal. Okay, and all those against, and any abstentions? Thank you. So with 9 in favour and 1 abstention, that is approved. Thank you all. Now, we do unusually have an agenda item 6 today. We've been going around an hour. I'm very happy to take a short adjournment if people wish, or I'm happy to plough on and go through the remainder of the agenda. I think I'm seeing indications that people are happy to keep moving. In which case, thank you, Becky and Dan. I think, oh, you're going to stay, Becky. So thank you, Dan. And I'll just note, thank you very much for a really clear report. And in particular, the summary sections, which were really, really helpful. And fans of the planning committee will need no introduction for who's joining us at the table momentarily, but just for anybody watching who hasn't seen Gareth before, we are being joined by Gareth Arnold as the development manager to talk us through agenda item 6. And thank you all to members of the public who were here during the meeting. I'm sure you'll find your own way out. So Gareth, do you want to just give us an overview of this report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the report on the council's appeal performance. It covers a 1-year period from April 25 to March 2026. I'll just whiz through. There wasn't a lot, let's have it all in front of them. So table 1 on page 83 sets out the number of appeals we had decided in that time period. 70 decisions made by the planning inspectorate on 72 appeals. Of those appeals, 12 were allowed, which is a percentage allowed of 17%. As a comparison, in England, across the same period, 31% of appeals were allowed. Turning over the page onto page 84, table 3 shows the appeals within the period that were related to committee decisions. One at the Jubilee Public House, former Jubilee Public House on Balfour Street, and one the proposal for the battery energy storage system at Merton Way. Both of those obviously were refused, which was other appeals. Both of them were allowed by the planning inspector. I think the major one, if memory serves me correctly, we had the introduction of grey belt between making the decision and the appeal being heard, which significantly undermined our committees and officers' decision that was made on the planning application. I've put some comparison stats in there, which is a bit of a new thing I thought members might be interested in. There's a comparison with last year's the previous year's 2024, 2025, which shows we've had significantly more appeals over the period, but also proportionally fewer have been allowed in comparison. And on that table 5, one thing that does show is that continuing upholding of the council's policies relating to HMOs. So during the period, we had 16 applications for changes of use to HMOs, and in that period, we only had one allowed. So that was a percentage allowed of 6%. And in the appendices, we have a list of those appeals decided, set out by ward. Appendix 2 is a lengthy series of summaries. Obviously, members do receive appeal decisions when they're received in full, when they're received from the planning inspectorate, but the officers provide these summaries for internal purposes within the team, so we can learn and from any decisions that are made. And then at Appendix C, there is a list of I think 35 outstanding appeals where we are waiting for the decision to be made. I'm quite happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Okay, so if you could just indicate any questions that you have, I've seen Councillor Fisher and then Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. This is a significant improvement on 2024-25. Obviously, the situation since the 2024-25 figures and the 2025-26 figures has been the adoption of the local plan. Do you feel the adoption of the local plan has strengthened our hand as a planning authority in refusing appeals?
It will have, and it also makes it a lot easier in dealing with appeals because we don't have to weigh a series of unadopted planning documents and then you try and persuade an inspector which one of those sometimes conflicting documents should take precedence. So yeah, it will be a factor and is obviously mentioned by inspectors in terms of when they're making their decisions. It is always given full weight. Obviously, we have to consider material considerations if they indicate that decisions should be made differently, but it's a strong factor in the council's performance.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. I hadn't clocked this when I first read it, but table 5, which breaks down the types of bill, I think is really useful, particularly as you've identified holiday lets in there as well. I think that's a really important thing that we keep tracking because we are continue to lose quite a lot of housing stock to those. So I mean, it'd be more useful to kind of understand how many of those 5 were holiday lets. And then secondly, I was just about the number of appeals. It was really just out of curiosity. I noticed there were quite a lot of appeals about the communications hubs. And so I wondered whether that had inflated the numbers of appeals really, and whether that was a reason why we've got more appeals going to the inspectorate this time around.
Yes. We received a significant number of applications and a significant number of appeals for the communications hub. 10 by the look of it. Which does lead to a bit of a spike, but you know, if you take those 10 off, it's still 46 to 62, so there's still an increase generally. In terms of the holiday lets, my recollection is that it's 4 out of those 5 are holiday lets, but I might be wrong. I've been hard since so.
Thank you. I think it is positive to see that we are winning the appeals on the holiday lets. I think that we all know how constrained we've been around that, and I think the approach that's being taken is the right one, and it's good to see that that's being recognised by the planning inspector. sorry, just I'm just checking. Councillor Fisher wasn't a supplementary question on the list, right? So I've got you on my list, and similarly with Councillor Rowley, it's not supplementary. No. In which case, next on my list is Councillor Maroney.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thanks very much for this very well presented report. Secondly, thank you for the number of appeals you managed to win for Hull Road. Sometimes it feels like everything goes through on the nod, and it's nice to have some figures to prove this is not true. And thirdly, and it's a bit cheeky rolling three into one, but the question is, we've got more appeals, and yet the quality of your work means the numbers that are allowed has gone down. I'm just wondering how that pans out with officer time. The refusals, when officers recommend applications for refusal, generally the report is written as an appeal statement, so we don't have to do another statement, and that is more time consuming both for the case officer and for the officer checking that off. And in certain circumstances, certainly for householder development, we don't get the opportunity to write another statement, and I think with changes to the appeals rules, that's going to only increase. So we will never get the chance to, oh, I wish I'd said that in the report, but it's okay, I can cover it in the statement. So we do have to put more work into refusals. I'm not sure, does that answer your question? Yes, it does, but it's sad that the number of appeals allowed has gone down, but it sounds like your workload's gone up because of the number of appeals. Our workload, the number of appeals are time consuming, both for our administration staff, because it's a very process-led system, and refusals are more time consuming. Whether it tends to come in bunches, whether I think it's probably swings and roundabouts as to whether it's identifiably causing us more workload, other than those stress points of actually having to hit the deadline set by the planning inspection. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. From time to time, in fact, quite regularly, we get the planning appeals allowed or dismissed coming as an email attachment. I think those are incredibly useful because when you read them, it gives you an idea of exactly what planning inspectors are thinking and how they're interpreting local and national policies. And I think it's very useful. We've got basically a summary of all of them there to keep for future reference. So yeah, thank you very much indeed for all those officers who've done a phenomenal amount of work to defend the position of this council.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. I'll second that. It's a very good point, well made. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair. Gareth, this is really good. I suppose last time I've seen anything like this, so thank you for that. I'm just curious that some of the graphs that you've got are really, well, they're all good, but one that I can't really see, but might be useful. Again, the mantra that was always kind of given to me was that unless you genuinely feel there's a planning reason as a committee not to follow the officer's recommendation, that we should. I've noticed that there were a number of appeals that that were allowed where officers had recommended approval, but the committee didn't approve. I'm just curious, because we only got like a small snapshot of the 12. I'm just curious how many of those were where officers had recommended approval, and as a committee we didn't. Just as a learning curve, really. But the other thing that I would ask, rather than come back with a supplementary, is that you alluded to the battery storage appeal within my ward. The recommendation from officers was refusal. The committee refused it. It went through an appeal, but I think you mentioned in your talk there some change in legislation. Have I? And if so,
Yeah.
would your it's kind of retrospective and in a sense it makes no difference. But with the change of legislation, would your recommendation in that have been different?
My recollection was that no, it wouldn't.
Right.
We still would have recommended refusal. The inspector, grey belts, the introduction of grey belt as part of the green belt made it more challenging. But actually, I think the inspector agreed with us that it wasn't grey belt. They put all the emphasis on the imperative of providing nationwide storage for green energy production. And so it was a very special circumstances decision rather than we weren't right. It shouldn't have been green belts or it should have been grey belts or something like that. In terms of the number of, on page 84, table 3, so those were there were only out of those that year's tranche of planning appeals. There were only 2 that were committee decisions. So that was the one relating to the Jubilee Public House. That was one that officers recommended approval and committee refused. And then the other one was the battery storage one. So there was only one out of those 72. Only one was a committee decision that was opposite, that was contrary to officers' recommendation.
I think it's worth noting as well, and thanks for that clarification, Gareth. I think it's worth noting, just for committee members' point of view, if we are ever in a position where we feel that we need to go against the officer recommendation, so long as we are acting reasonably, we have every right to do so. We get into difficult territory if we're going against an officer recommendation and are just going, well, we just don't like it. We haven't really got a good reason, but we just don't like it. So the planning inspector always takes into account where we have acted reasonably, and that extends to the award of costs and those sorts of things as well. So we should always be seeing these reports as being the planning authority are giving us every bit of information that we need to make a determination. They're giving us their recommendation, and most of the time I would expect the committee to be seeing that as being the reasonable way forward in the way that we would expect. But we are within our right to act reasonably and come to a different conclusion.
It's reasonable to note in the case of the Jubilee that the inspector didn't consider that the authority had acted unreasonably. They just felt that the balance of weight was that the landowner had done all that they needed to do to satisfy satisfy the inspector that the use was no longer viable. The use of a public house was no longer viable. We didn't consider the decision to be unreasonable. Just came to a different conclusion.
Okay, I don't think anybody else is jumping up and down to ask further questions. That's really helpful to have that information coming to committee, and I'm sure that be possibly in a year's time again, or whenever the next appropriate moment is, but we'll have that 6 months. 6 months. But otherwise, with no urgent business, thank you all for your time this evening, and that is the end of the meeting. Thank you.